Now, Australia, of course, has been somewhat different from that. Of course, there's been a history of quite extensive land use here, but particularly when we're talking about the Wet Tropics World Heritage Area, this is an area that's been substantially protected. And I think it's important to emphasize just how critical and how really unique this area is. Firstly, in the Australian context, it's only about 1,000th of Australia's continental land area. And yet, a major analysis which sort of looked at the biogeographic and the biological uniqueness and irreplaceability of different ecosystems on the planet. So this was over 173,000 different protected areas on the planet, ranked the Wet Tropics World Heritage Area as the 6th most critical and irreplaceable. Of World Heritage areas, it was the 2nd most critical and irreplaceable. I think this just gives you a global perspective on what we're talking about here. Anybody from anywhere on the planet looking around would say this is absolutely critical biological and environmental real estate. You would not want to risk it from an international, from a global perspective for lots of different reasons.
Hello, Rainforest Trust. Kelvin, how are you? Kelvin probably knows that I've been in this rainforest conservation work for a very long time. I was one of the people that put up the extension of the Cape Tribulation National Park with Paul Mason back in the late 70s. Was at the Daintree Bloomfield Road blockade and was there with a World Heritage listing and so on. And it didn't take us long, and in the past we always realized that private land would play a very big role in the conservation of the area, totally, that national parks and public land along mountaintops was not quite enough. And we were very lucky from Daintree to Bloomfield. From Cape Tribulation to Bloomfield we had unbroken rainforest right down to the water's edge. These days there's only a road in there, but there's no subdivisions. In most places, the flat land has been cleared and put into agriculture, so it's a very difficult situation to get big, viable blocks. And with something like our World Heritage Area, we've got a big bulge here down in the south, very nice, around Bellin and Kerr and so on. Then it pinches up very narrow around Kuranda, and then it opens up again to the Windsor Tablelands and tapers up and goes on up toward Cooktown. So that evolutionary flow of plants and animals, which is critical, and one of the reasons why the place was put on the World Heritage list, one of the oldest continuous living rainforests in the world, and in an active evolutionary state. And I think, of course, Bill Laurance's comments, which came out of the International World Heritage body, making the claim that this World Heritage Area, the Wet Tropics, was the #2 most important for preservation and protection in the whole world. Well, that's gigantic. I mean, to make a claim like that is absolutely enormous. And I could see where it came from, even though the area is relatively big here for us in North Queensland. It's relatively small for Australia, and it's relatively small compared to the Amazon, and it's relatively small to Southeast Asia, and we just end up to these little dots here. But from an evolutionary, biological, primitive rainforest record and living museum, it's huge. So now we're faced with the problem again, just like we were in the Daintree, when we had Daintree buyback, when Rainforest Rescue and the Daintree Rainforest Foundation was originally setting it up, and we had Bush Heritage came in and actually bought the first block with us, the Daintree Rainforest Foundation at Palm Road, which was 20 acres in that day. Subsequently, of course, the work of the Rainforest Rescue has been tremendous, and other people have been in that, like Chris Bennett and others that Kelvin again spent endless amounts of time buying up strategic blocks of land all through there, which were remnants of the historical settlement pattern and freehold land. Fortunately, there were some blocks left that were uncleared, and the ones that were cleared have all been re-vegged that have been bought. So that's a terrific job up there and fantastic. That effort has to move to Kuranda. That's the facts, that's the situation.
that area of land, which would be Kerwald, is in the shortest, smallest pinch point of the World Heritage Area. It's absolutely critical that that area of land, which is hundreds and hundreds of acres, is not developed any further than it ever was, which was a cattle farm. And it was an unkempt one at that. So that meant that there was a lot of regrowth that should never have been removed because it was far too advanced to have been removed. It was restoring nicely. However, that's history. So that piece of land is the connection between the north and the south areas of the World Heritage Area. If that area of land is developed, then it's going to destroy, and I think it will effectively separate the northern and southern sections. Now, that means that cassowaries, which is the iconic animal for all wildlife. So when I say cassowaries, I'm saying cassowaries and bettongs and all the other bits and pieces of animals and insects that are part of it, and possums and snakes and everything. So the word cassowary encapsulates all of that. So if that's destroyed, then we isolate those populations. And that's going to mean that not only the trees get isolated, because the cassowary is the large animal that carries the seeds large distances, so the integrity of the north and south sections is going to be compromised simply because the smallest part needs to be expanded, not diminished. And what we're doing by allowing that area of land to develop is diminishing it. And there is absolutely no excuse for that at any level of government to make that stand at this time. It would be a crime.
Well, when it comes to that, you're talking about Barnwell property. I mean, you know, you said 89 years ago it was developed into a cattle station. Well, the word developed, there was no development there. It was just a clearing of trees to allow for cattle to have some grazing land, and prior to that it was just pristine rainforest that had been there from the beginning of time. And our people, the Bulwai people in this land of around Kuranda, have been the guardians of this land, you know, for millennia. And as all the white people noted when they first come to this country, you know, it was paradise. The massive giant trees, the ducks of the rivers, the fishes of the rivers, the birds of the forest. And unfortunately in those, if it was 89 years ago, where's it all gone today? I remember it all when I was a child. The abundance of wildlife here, the Barren River being blue. Can you imagine that? The Barren River being blue, you know, an abundance of fish, the species of fish that were all there. And obviously over time I come to understand that a lot of this land being cleared for the cattle in those days, even on the other side of the river, has come to the, you know, where there's an action, there's reactions. And that action has caused a reaction of the disappearance of a lot of wildlife forever. You can't replace that. And that's too much in a short time to happen to nature and anywhere on the planet. And unfortunately, because we were a part of that system as well, that river system, the bird system, the duck system, as a staple diet for ourselves, and then my people got affected by that. And you find that even on this river system here, that us who were the fish eaters of the river, now we don't eat fish from the river any longer. And a lot of our people have gone since too. And I call it due to the effects of what's going on with our rivers around us and our waters. So it's crucial to look after the land that enter these waters, and you know, whatever you put on the land, it ends up into our river systems. The frogs, you know, like the birds particularly, and the frogs, all the little critters from the smaller creeks, because they're home to another little system. You know, not many people get out there and know this place like Aboriginals do, or people who use it for a profession. You know, but us, you know, those are just all our little dreamtime creatures, and you know, we love them all. You know, that's what our lifestyle is based on, the totems of them, and in return we take on animal totems and plant totems to ensure the preservation of those creatures through our human bodies. So as you can see now, you know, the protection now is not so much from us Aboriginal people, but it's coming into groups like that, which I support, because I see the commonality between their ways of thinking. Might be a little bit different to the Aboriginal way, but we're heading down the same path in the way of preservation. And that's a beautiful thing for the land and for the people and for the future.
Look, I think it's really important for an organisation like Rainforest Trust to be involved in the securing of that Barnwell property and also some of the other adjacent properties in that area. Because Kuranda is such a pinch point in the wet tropics, it's a very critical corridor, and the Barnwell property is a very significant piece of that jigsaw in that corridor in the wet tropics. The reason why I think Rainforest Trust is a great organisation to be involved with is because they've got a really good track record of strategically buying critical habitat. So they're a great organisation, they're an international organisation, which means that they can raise funds and raise awareness in a very broad context across the globe, and not just regionally in Queensland or Australia. And secondly, I think with Rainforest Trust, I think Kuranda is a great community to be involved with Rainforest Trust. Considering we've only got a population of about 1,700 people, we've got all these organisations that can get on board and be part of the acquisition process, and even have community, you know, be involved in the fundraising component as well, in terms of actually contributing to buying back the Barnwell property, but also in terms of remediation. We've got Kuranda Conservation, we've got Kuranda EnviroCare, we've got Friends of the Earth North Queensland, which is based in Kuranda. We've got the Cairns and Far North Environment Centre. We've got Kur Alert Incorporated, just based here in Kuranda. We've got the Kuranda Region Planning Group. So for such a small population, we've got such a diverse community, activated and environmentally aware community that will just jump on board with Rainforest Trust, secure the property, revegetate it and restore that corridor in the wet tropics.
We have to make a start, and there's still significant amounts of rainforest land here intact, and there is areas that are being sold now, and we're right on the cusp of a big development push, because when the Kuranda Range is actually redone, it's going to be a 4-lane highway, and the area is going to develop like mad. So when we have upgrading of what we call the Range Road, a lot of the opportunities that we see now are going to be much more difficult. Land speculators will move in. There'll be lots more problems to secure land. At the moment, it's not quite as hard, although the problem with the Kur world, of course, is that we have Chinese investors come in, but they have no real understanding nor any real concern that we've seen about what World Heritage listing really means and what the good neighbor policy on World Heritage is. A totally different concept. And let's say that we can't necessarily blame them. They don't have much of a World Heritage perspective. They don't have many World Heritage areas, certainly not rainforest and natural areas. They have their Great Walls and they have some other great features and World Heritage areas, but they don't have tropical rainforest, obviously. And what it looks like with our proponents for the larger development plan here, which includes a huge amount of subdivisions and so on. Their idea of recreational use, their idea of natural areas means a totally different thing, like running quad bikes through it, for example. They think that's fine. You have a track, you have some creeks, you run through it, you dive through it. This is fun. Well, that's the stuff we have to deal with, and that's why, in the end, trying to have a battle to protect and rezone private land all the time for conservation zonings is difficult, takes a lot of resources, and in the end, buying the land is the safest, quickest, most expedient way to secure it for conservation, for protected area status.
Yeah, so the cassowary is, as we know, a keystone species for the wet tropics. It's such an important seed disperser. They're like seeing dolphins in the ocean. Anybody that sees a dolphin diving through the waves brings immediate joy and pleasure, and just brings about joy. And when you see cassowary in the wild, you just stand back and go, wow, is that really a living thing in this forest? And it brings back a primordial feeling when you do see them. They're actually the kings and queens of the forest. They're a keystone species. The Barnwell property is a really fragmented block that prohibits the migration of cassowaries between north and south. Barnwell is very important in terms of reconnecting that connectivity for cassowaries. And if we can save the cassowaries, we can save every other species there is in the wet tropics, in the rainforest. If we can save the cassowary, we can save the northern quolls, the northern bedongs, we can save the owls, we can save the insects, we can save the frogs, because all of those species needs the same habitat as the cassowary. So if we can use the cassowary as a mascot, as an emblem, as a logo for the conservation of Barnwell, well then so be it, because underneath the cassowary, you've got all the other species. So it's no point talking about conserving the insect diversity and Ulysses butterflies and Cairns birdwings and frogs and goannas, because they just all fall in underneath the cassowary. So let's drive the cassowary as being the impetus for saving Barnwell, because it's the keystone species for this area.
In the event that we actually, that whole thing doesn't go ahead and we end up with that land in our hands, then it needs to be rehabilitated to the level of the World Heritage Area to which it is adjacent. And all that's there, it just needs to be read, and then you replace it with the same things to continue it all the way through. And that's going to be terribly important, because all the things that we would lose, we would now gain. So wonderful to have the cassowary going through, and all the other animals and possums and everything, and the integrity of the World Heritage Area is enhanced.
The Rainforest Trust people, they should look at this land and really give it some really good hard thinking, because we have a bird here called the cassowary, and that's where all our spirituality comes from. And my people believe that we come from the cassowary. And again, we have such an ancient bird here, and even that is falling on the edge of extinction. And how can this be? How can this be in such a short time? I mean, my family only left the forest just over 100 years ago, and a cassowary, you know, he's been here before people. Before people. So he comes from the ancient times, before people were on this earth. So now for him to disappear, it's just not right. It's just unthinkable.
You've got the Kuranda tree frog, which is what's listed federally as a critically endangered species. The majority of the population of that species is on the Barnwell property, and it's owned as freehold by a Chinese casino executive that we know doesn't really have the best interest of the frogs at heart, We know that he loves cows, cattle, the cattle industry, and his end game for that property is mass urban subdivision. I couldn't think of a worse place on the entire planet to stick 1,000 people than on that Barnwell property. That is the absolute worst case scenario. And surely we as a community can get a better outcome for that property and also some of the adjacent properties where this Kuranda tree frog, inhabits. In actual fact, we should really be getting the state and federal government involved in the buyback, and something that I'd be really interested in canvassing with the federal government, and they've done this before for many properties, is that if Rainforest Trust throw their support behind the purchase of Barnwell, that sends a very clear indication to the federal government and to the state that we've got private investors interested in buying back critical habitat for a critically endangered species, not just for the frog, but for the cassowary and many others, the northern quoll, and also the Myola palm. The list goes on. And I really believe that we can encourage the federal and state government to chip in dollar for dollar, maybe a 50% contribution towards the buyback of that Barnwell property. And I think we've got a very good case for that.
The Kuranda tree frog, because it's another very localised species where a large proportion of the distribution falls on outside of protected areas like national parks and the World Heritage Area, and it falls on people's private land or rail and road areas and that kind of thing. So it's an ideal species for the community to lead the protection.
And how vulnerable is the Kuranda tree frog? What numbers do you have?
So the Kuranda tree frog falls in the highest categories of in terms of the status of being endangered on some lists, or critically endangered on some. So depending on which list you look at, the state one, the federal one, or the international IUCN one, it falls in the highest category on any of those. So that's either endangered or critically endangered. That means without good protection and efforts put into looking after it, it could go extinct in the near future. That's what those categories mean. And the estimate of adult population is somewhere between about 500 and 1,000 individuals, which is a very small total number. And the other thing that's a worry for this species is that small number is split across a number of small breeding populations. So you could quite easily lose a population here or there, and then it has quite big impacts on the overall population and distribution.
Would you say that there are many other frog species like the Kuranda frog in that they live in such a small habitat area?
Oh, some frogs do have small distributions. The Kuranda tree frog certainly has one of the smallest distributions of any Australian frog. It's a very small distribution, and some other species, particularly on some of the mountaintops in North Queensland, have just naturally very small distributions up on those mountaintops. But no, the Kuranda tree frog is definitely one of the smallest distributions, and as I said earlier, actually, one of the key things with the Kuranda tree frog is that, unlike some of those other frogs, for example, those ones up on the mountaintop, just by chance of where park boundaries fall and history and that kind of thing, the majority of that tiny distribution for the Kuranda tree frog falls outside of protected areas. So it occurs on people's private land, or where there's road and rail sort of easements and land through, or council areas. So it's an example of a very localised species that's unique to the Kuranda area, where basically the fate of that species falls in the hands of all the residents and everyone in that area. So it's something where a community-led action plan really is the best way forward to try and get everyone who's involved to get together to try and find fairly simple and positive things for this species.
And is it a matter of people being aware enough of the Kuranda tree frog? Do you think people are aware of its plight and are interested to help?
Yeah, so the community in Kuranda is a very environmentally aware community. I think it's always had that history.
So what we have in this narrow corridor between the two wider and larger areas of the World Heritage is about 7 kilometers from the top of the Barren Falls, going west until basically the rainfall gradient and the soils change and the land becomes open forest and different types of forest. The rainforest basically peters out, moves into your sclerophyll forest and other types of forest. So that's 7 kilometers that we have through there. Only has a couple of very small state forests that were timber reserves in the past. One off the Kennedy Highway, which is only a few thousand hectares, and then Kuranda State Forest, which is another couple thousand hectares. All the rest of the substantial amount of several thousand hectares, tens of thousands of hectares, is all private land. The private land, however, is mainly in big blocks. And even with the Kerr World site, they had 12 blocks that were all over 100 acres or 40, 50 hectares. So although those blocks were in pieces, and that is the general pattern at the moment. As I said, when the Kuranda Range is actually rebuilt, you're going to have application for subdivisions are going to be everywhere. As you know, that's the main game in town is subdivide. So we've got that at the moment, and within that whole corridor, critical habitat and so on, the cassowary is critical habitat, the Myola frog, endangered species, and the Myola palm, another endangered species. It's only by the effort of people who might own the land, or if it's owned by a conservation body such as Rainforest Trust, that is going to look after it for preservation purposes. That's the settlement pattern. That's what we are faced with. That's what we were actually given to us as a state of play.
It would mean a demonstration of the way mankind ought to be behaving. Instead of taking on this endless, bottomless pit that is called the environment, we would finally be giving back and paying our debt to the environment by giving this little bit back. So as far as the environment's concerned, it's a little bit to give back, it's an enormous amount to take. So it would be a demonstration that we have learnt the lesson, and that we know that this is what we've got to do, and all our developments should be done in this way. So not no development, just that development done in the right way that is not constantly borrowing from the environment. And it would be such a wonderful thing to be able to say, here environment, take back what we have taken from you.
Yeah, Kuranda has such a dynamic, engaged community. I think the Barnwell property is a great impetus for the community to really get behind a positive project. And this is a really significant project for the wet tropics, for Queensland, for Australia, where we can get together and rehabilitate a very significant corridor in the wet tropics that is basically groundbreaking in terms of the context of the site. It's a 650 hectare site, not all of it's cleared, but you know, there's about 200, 300 hectares that needs attention in terms of re-veg and care and love. And I think us as a community, we've got the track record of revegetating Kuranda. Back in the early days, a lot of Kuranda was cleared, and I think we've got the track record, we've got the passion, we've got the drive as a community to continue on that path to re-vegging Kuranda back to how it used to be, and increasing its biodiversity, its habitat, its corridors. And I think we can make it happen. And I think it's a really positive thing, and I'm getting shivers just thinking about it. It's exciting. It's really good. Yeah. So it's just a matter of getting Barnwell back under community hands with a conservation covenant, some sort of a nature refuge covenant over the property to protect it for perpetuity, and we can get in there and really do great things with that property. Yeah.
Well, you know, the whole lot is really, really important, you know, like the whole damn lot is important, you know, because as you know, in nature, you know, everything's linked. And, you know, we're trying to re-link back the broken links from the timber getters, you know, and the farmers. And there's only been 100 years of that in this area, thank God. You know, not like the rest of Australia, south of us, where, you know, there's go into 200 years. So some of that land south of us is virtually unrepairable, you know. The amount of chemicals gone into the topsoils and stuff over the years. But here, you know, you just look at it, cleared forests and cattle's plopped on top. And that's it. So it's really worthwhile saving. you know, and these frogs will come back and the birds will come back, as nature does, if you give them a place to live. Because this is their home originally, you know, and my home originally as well. We happen to live in harmony, and that's why it's good to see the non-Indigenous people see that as a beautiful way of life as well too, to live in harmony with nature, because there's no better teachers than nature.
Like Guyula, don't want to be just like Gummery. I want to fly high in the sky and watch this world go floating by, floating right on by, floating by, floating right on by. Two brothers come sailing from the north, coming down by raft, past this place you know, called Guyula. Guyula, 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 Guyula. Coming down Wangeti way, Wangajung where they gonna play, yes, with the law. Coming up Barren River, bringing laws to the people. Jabakanje, Yaraganje, Bolwanje, Yagalai, Yagalai. Yes, I see. I want to be just like Guyula. Don't want to be just like Gummery. I want to fly high in the sky and watch this world go floating by, floating by. Come on, come on. Sitting on the banks was Guyula. It was to make that fire rise higher and higher. Hey, Gummery, don't you stand. I want you to give me a hand. We gonna make this fire rise higher. Come on. Bury Janang, bury Janang, bury Janang, bury Janang, bury Janang, bury Janang, bury Janang. I want to be just like Guyula. Don't want to be just like Gummery. I want to fly high in the sky and watch this world go floating by. Floating by. Come on, come on. Like Guyula, don't want to be just like Gummery. I want to